2, 1.
Research. Innovate.
Educate. This is RTP. This is RTP180.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, wherever you happen to be out there in the world. Welcome to RTP180, presented by RTI International and our streaming sponsor, Dual Boot Partners. My name is Wade Minter. I will be your MC for this week, as well as I am for every third Thursday here for RTP180. As you can tell, I am stuck here in the frontier where I have been stuck since March. It's still very lonely, and I'm running out of snacks. I had to break into the Raisinets today, and that should show you just how desperate I am. But enough about me. This is all about our speakers. The topic for this month is relationships, and we're excited to show you what we've got going on. Again, we can't do this without our sponsors, so big thanks to RTI International for their sponsorship, as well as Dual Boot Partners for bringing this live stream to you on Zoom, Facebook, or wherever you happen to be. Now, the way this works is we've got 5 speakers. Each of them will have about 5 minutes to speak on their area of expertise on the topic of relationships. At the end of about 5 minutes, you'll hear this. A dog will salivate, an angel will get its wings, and that's their signal to wrap it up. Because then we move into 5 minutes of Q&A that we get from you, our audience. So if you're in Zoom, please type your answers into Zoom chat. Don't use the Q&A feature because I'm not really checking that. Put it in chat. Make sure your chat is set to all panelists and attendees. If you're watching us on a social platform, you can also put your questions there. We have staff members who will be monitoring those and passing questions along. We can't do this without your questions, so please send them in to us. Tweet at us, Instagram at us, go on Facebook Live. Please give us your questions. In fact, we're going to just do a quick test right here to make sure all of you know how to use the chat feature. In the Zoom chat right now, if you would please type in where you are viewing RTP180 from. Where are you right now as you're watching me and this weird ring light in front of me opine to you with Seattle, Washington, Topsail, North Carolina, the general state of North Carolina, that's pretty vague, Southern North Raleigh, which I believe is downtown, Philly, Cary, Bull Cities representing, Benson, Home of Mule Days, nachos in Cary. I wish I had nachos. Instead, I have Raisinets. Orlando, Florida, the Magic City. Awesome. So we've got a wide variety of people, East Coast, West Coast, and everything in between. Thank you so much for joining us. Now that you know how to use the Zoom chat, I will be expecting you to put in questions. Now, normally you would be here with me at the frontier, but unfortunately, as you probably already know, the Rona. That said, we've got some exciting news. We are planning to open the area's only free, and I pause for emphasis, co-working facility back to the general public in a safe, socially distanced way on November 2nd. That's right, if you need to get out of the house, you can sign up for a reservation to come to the frontier. You can use the CoWorks, CoWorks. My mom was an English teacher. The CoWorks app to sign up for a spot to come to the frontier as we start to gradually reopen and get back to seeing other people again. That's gonna be fun. I'll finally get to have a friend again. Now we have all sorts of other activities. You can check us out, Frontier on the web, food trucks, yoga, the box yard, all sorts of great stuff there in the heart of Research Triangle Park. Excuse me. One thing that's new and exciting that's coming up is the Pop Box. What is the Pop Box, you might ask? Nobody asked. All right, so the Pop Box is, we will start on November 10th, accepting applications for women-owned and Black, Indigenous, people of color, entrepreneurs, restaurateurs to give them a 3-month pop-up shop at the Box Yard in RTP. The 4 businesses that are selected will also be given a $5,000 micro grant in partnership with NC IDEA and the Research Triangle Foundation. So if you have an idea for a business or you'd like to get your business in there, check out boxyard.rtp.org/popbox for more details on that. Exciting opportunity there. I have covered all of the preliminaries as far as you know, so it's time to get into what you're here for, and that is our speakers. So it's time to recognize our first speaker of the evening. She's a leader and luminary who finds joy in leading and coaching, living well, cooking healthy meals, and working on creative projects. Please welcome our first speaker of the evening, Dr. Margaret A. Brunson.
Thank you. Thank you. Super exciting. Love your voice, Wade. All right. So one day a few years ago, I was out shopping and ran into a friend that I hadn't seen in a while. And so we began to chit chat and catch up. And while we talked, she asked me, "How's your love life?" Well, I knew what she was asking. And any other time I would have said, "Oh girl, I'm still single." But in that moment, something clicked for me, because while I was without romantic partnership, my life was certainly not void of love. And so I responded to her, "Girl, my love life is wonderful," because I knew that there was an abundance of ways that my heart, soul, and life were full of and overflowing with love. But that question, "How's your love life?" it stayed with me and became a question that I regularly ask myself. And I ask myself because I want to make sure that I'm cultivating a life of love, a life that I love, the love life. You know, I think one of the most important relationships that we have is the one that we have with ourselves. Usually our relationship with ourselves begins to shape the relationships that we have with others. And I believe that self-love, loving yourself, is one of the ways that we cultivate better relationships with everyone and everything else, from our colleagues and our families to even our money. But we hear a lot of talk about self-love. What does it really mean to love yourself? Well, self-love is not this arrogant declaration that's rooted in the belief that we're better than everyone else. But it's also not this touchy-feely sentiment that's all about hot bubble baths and aromatherapy massages, even though those are lovely. To love yourself as you are is the beginning of a healthy sense of self-worth and confidence. And we know that when we're confident and believe in our own worthiness, then we will seek opportunities for growth and to be our best selves. And when we're our best selves and we love ourselves, we can be our best selves and love others. So I believe that in order to cultivate more self-love, there are three major areas of focus. First is identity. Identity. This is how we define who we are, and we develop the confidence to be that person in the world. And one of the ways that we begin to form our identity is in how we speak to ourselves. When we speak down to or about ourselves, we actually begin to believe it. But when we speak words of kindness to ourselves, we actually begin to believe that. And so we know that whatever we say or believe something, when we believe something long enough, we'll actually act on it. That means we need to watch our words. And we need to speak to ourselves the way that we speak to someone we love. When's the last time you spoke kindly to yourself? Second is intimacy. Now, when we love someone, we spend time with them to get to know them. We want to know what they care about, and we want to know what makes them tick. Our relationship with ourselves is really no different. We often need to sit with ourselves, think, feel, dream, and learn what we need. Because when we know what we need in order to feel healthy and alive, we'll actually do our best to make it happen. And sometimes intimacy with yourself looks like engaging in your passions, learning new hobbies and skills, or spending time in meditation so that we learn how to remain present and calm during difficult moments. When's the last time you spent some quality time with yourself? Thirdly, is intention. Intention. If you're raising a child, it's likely that you don't haphazardly take care of them. Well, maybe pre-COVID. But you take care of your child or plant or pet with intention, and you meet their needs. You're present with them. You listen. You consider their feelings. You teach them, and you make sure that they have everything they need in order to be successful. Well, We need and deserve that same deliberate and intentional effort and energy. Taking care of our needs with intention actually strengthens the feelings of love, belonging, and connection that we all so desperately need. When's the last time you intentionally did something just for yourself? So I believe that identity, intimacy, and intention leads us to the love life that we all deserve and need. And not just so that we can be good to ourselves, but so that we can be good to others. So I ask you this evening, how's your love life?
All right. Thank you, Dr. Brunson. Wonderful story of self-care there, especially in these times. So if you have questions for Dr. Brunson about being intentional and self-caring, go ahead and put those in chat. You like that recovery there? That was good. That was good stuff there. So get those questions in. So we have a question coming in from social media. Someone's on social media saying they are struggling with, anxiety and depression during this lockdown time. Is there any specific thing that you would recommend that they do as a first step to really kind of start giving themselves some love in this time of crisis?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. I think that there's certainly some things we can do on our own to work through anxiety and depression. And then I also think that it's always good to seek professional help, to reach out to a counselor or a therapist. A lot of times people don't even know what their insurance covers. And so even just checking in with your insurance provider to see if your insurance covers mental health treatment or mental health counseling. But I would suggest, if you're not seeking professional help, to really cultivate a practice of mindfulness, even 2 or 3 minutes in the morning at the beginning of your day, where you're doing deep breathing. Maybe get on YouTube and do some yoga, moving your body, consistently taking walks, but just carving out that space to really tune in to how you're feeling. And I will also say, please seek help. If it gets really bad and you can't bear it anymore, I would say really seek professional help.
Excellent. Lots of options there for people. Question coming in from Eric in Zoom chat. How do you practice self-love without feeling selfish?
I love this question, okay? Because one of the things that I use as an analogy is, and many of us have not done this in a while, but whenever you fly, and they tell you they show you how to use the oxygen mask, they always instruct you to put on your mask first before you help others. And the reason for that is because of hypoxia. If you lose oxygen, you will not be able to help other people. And so there's this counterintuitive thing we have to do where we have to actually breathe and take care of ourselves first so that we can be good to other people. And I always think of that analogy when I feel like, oh, I'm only focusing on myself. We can actually be better to other people when we're good to ourselves.
It's an excellent point. It's a great analogy. Question coming in from Nora in Zoom chat. Can you tell us a little bit about Illuminated Leadership Solutions? Tell us a little bit more about how we learn about your business.
Yes, so my website is www.mbisfree.com, and that's all my social. I'm the CEO and founder of Illumined Leadership Solutions. I provide authentic and transformative leadership consulting, leadership development, and organizational development consulting to individuals, groups, organizations, and businesses. I really focus on how we lead well, and how we do that from first starting with ourselves and then going out to the collective.
Excellent. Thank you so much for your expertise in this area. We will all try to be a little more mindful and give ourselves some love to make it through the day. Ladies and gentlemen, a big virtual hand for Dr. Margaret A. Brunson.
Thank you.
All right, our first speaker down, but we've got 4 more to go. Our next speaker of the evening. She is a professor and the head of the Department of Communications at NC State University. Please welcome Dr. Jessica Katz Jameson.
Thank you, Wade, and thanks everyone for being here. I had originally planned to start off this talk about workplace relationships by talking about how important they are because we spend more time with our coworkers than we do our families. That may not exactly be true right now. But for those of us who are fortunate enough to be working from home, we know that especially in a time of social distancing, we have to be very intentional about maintaining our connection to others, and that includes attending to our workplace relationships. So why does it matter? It's about actively creating the kind of workplace that you want to be in. So imagine you have a difficult conversation that you need to have with a coworker. Maybe they turned in a report that reflected poorly on you. It was full of errors and embarrassed you with an important client. How comfortable are you having that conversation? I would suggest that it depends a lot on whether your existing relationship is based on trust and the assumption of goodwill. If so, that conversation is a lot easier to have. So to develop these kinds of positive workplace relationships, I developed a framework with the acronym LEARN, and that stands for listening, engage, acknowledge, build rapport, and nurture. So it all starts with listening. The first thing we have to be able to do is listen to ourselves. This is kind of similar to what Dr. Margaret was just sharing with us. We have to be able to know how we are likely to respond to things so that we can listen to others openly and without judgment. So listening to ourselves means paying attention to those things that create that gut reaction in you, that either lead you to get defensive or perhaps just lead you to tune out. If we're self-aware, we can suspend those gut instinctive reactions and respond in ways that are kind, empathetic, and with curiosity. In conflict situations, open and non-judgmental listening will prevent conflict escalation and help us identify the underlying interests of our coworkers so that we can engage in collaboratively problem solving. And that leads us to engage. Most people avoid conflict in the workplace, either due to a fear of retaliation, that they'll get hurt somehow, or the belief that it won't matter and it won't change anything. But when we engage with others directly by being honest, but also being respectful, we'll be seen as authentic. You're engaged when you demonstrate that this conversation you're having right now is the most important thing happening in the world. We all know that in these days of virtual meetings, it's all too easy to try to multitask, check your email, think about what you're going to cook for dinner later on. You know who you are, but your coworkers know when they're getting your full attention. And I assure you, you will get much more out of meetings when you are fully engaged. That brings us to acknowledging. One way to signal that you're listening and engaged is to acknowledge when someone has spoken. Acknowledge that they've been heard and that you respect their experience, knowledge, or expertise. You build trust and goodwill when you acknowledge the value that your coworkers bring to the workplace. Notice that that doesn't mean you have to agree with them. In fact, acknowledgement may even be more important when you disagree, because when you honor another's experience, knowledge, or expertise, they're more likely to be accepting of the arguments that you're bringing to the table. In my research across several different professions and workplace environments, I've consistently seen a huge difference when coworkers accept, recognize, and acknowledge each other, and they're much more able to engage in collaborative conflict. So building rapport. If we follow the guidance of the first three steps, listening, engaging, and acknowledging, we likely are on the path to developing the trust and goodwill needed to establish good rapport. One important way to build rapport is to allow time for social conversations during meetings. Now, these days, many of us are starting most of our conversations by asking people how they're holding up. But in non-pandemic times, we tend to skip that step and just work on crossing off the tasks that are on our to-do lists. Sharing stories, asking questions, just catching up and talking about even mundane aspects of your day builds that connection that enables you to get to know your coworkers. And that makes all the future conversations, especially the hard ones, easier. And there's not just building rapport in the moment, but there's also nurturing those relationships. Now, true confession, I have no less than 3 plants dying in my home right now as I speak to you. I don't even realize that they're dying, unfortunately, until they turn colors, but they shouldn't be. Fortunately, I think I'm better at nurturing my human relationships. We have to make sure that we don't ignore those. And they might be easy to ignore, especially now in a time of social distancing. Many of us may not have appreciated how much we miss the random interactions by the coffee pot, at the water cooler, or even in the hallway. Those conversations that often felt like intrusions or interruptions actually serve an important social purpose, and we get an amazing amount of work done too, whether it's setting up meetings or just catching each other up on important information. So these days in particular, we need to be intentional about making time for those conversations. That might mean sending an email even when you don't need anything, posting on social media to stay connected, or, gasp, calling someone on the phone. I know my mother's listening and she wants me to take my own advice. These days, we need to be intentional about doing those things. The Learn framework has the potential to build and improve individual relationships, as well as create a culture of collaboration and constructive conflict management that can be felt and experienced throughout your organization. So I encourage you to go out there and learn, and I thank you for listening.
All right, thank you, Dr. Jameson, for giving us a framework for which to learn. I like that.
Thank you.
All right, time to get your questions into chat or social media. We have a question coming in from social media. It says, you've listed off 5 items that make up learn: listen, engage, acknowledge, rapport, and nurture. Of those, which one do you think people struggle with the most, and why?
I'm going to go with listening. I think we tend to be very poor listeners, despite the common, heard adage that we have 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. We tend to be very focused on responding. So we're often rehearsing our response to someone rather than really listening to what they have to say. I think it's especially problematic in the sort of environment that we're living in right now, politically and socially. We have people who are really polarized and have really different views, and we are often unwilling to listen and unable to listen to those whose views differ from ours. So I'd say that one's the one you got to work at the most.
Excellent. Another question coming in from social media. What percentage should we be devoting to each part of learn?
I haven't broken it down mathematically, but I think, part of the challenge of that question is that some of them they're so overlapping, right? So building rapport and nurturing relationships are things that kind of go together. I have them separately to remind people that nurturing has to take place even when we don't necessarily need something from someone. And I think that's really hard. We often will reach out to someone when we need something, but if we only do that, right, then they might not be as likely to want to help us. So I think engaging is the one that is perhaps most important, because as I said, a lot of people prefer to avoid conflict and avoid difficult conversations, for good reason, and sometimes very valid reasons. But if the stronger the relationship we have, the easier those conversations become.
Excellent. A question from Catherine on social media. She says that when you work at home these days, which a lot of us are doing, you're always at work. What's a good way, if you are working from home, to have time to engage and time for yourself?
That's a great question, and I think it really goes along with what Dr. Margaret was sharing with us about making sure that you do take that time for yourself. One of the big advantages for me about working at home is that I have my watch, set to tell me when I need to stand every hour. And so every hour I get up and I go play with my dog for a few minutes. I never did that when I was in the workplace, in the office. So I do think you have to be, again, very intentional about making that time, not feel guilty about taking that time, to go back to, comment that was discussed when Margaret spoke, just really finding ways to build time in for yourself. And I recognize that what I'm saying is a lot harder for people who have small children at home. I do not. So I really do empathize with that. But I just think it's finding time. And I want to also echo what Margaret said about mindfulness. And if you can find an app or something that will help you meditate even for 10 minutes a day, I have found that that is hugely helpful. And it also helps you with the listening to yourself piece that I mentioned at the outset, that the more you kind of engage in mindfulness, the more self-aware you are. And that helps with this whole process.
Excellent. Big thanks for your perspective, Dr. Jessica Ket Jameson.
Thank you.
We are approaching the halfway point here at RTP 180, so it is time to welcome our next speaker of the evening. She's been sharing her life on the internet since before the word blogging even existed. Please welcome Linda Nguyen.
Hi, everyone. So like Wade said, thank you, Wade. My name is Linda. I will be sharing how to turn strangers into friends with social media. A little bit about me. I have had an online presence since I was 15 years old. I'm 37 now. My first website was built on GeoCities. It's an inside joke for other older millennials. I'm a full-time content creator and a portrait photographer, so I spend a lot of time on social media, and I've made all my friends in North Carolina through social media. And before that, most of my friends came from online first too. So how did I create friendships, not knowing one single soul in North Carolina? The first thing I did was I used hashtags and joined online groups that are local to kind of pinpoint the people who were public about their interest, and I was able to find people with similar interests. So for me, it's food blogging and photography and travel. And then after finding these people, I would look into engaging with their content. So not only did I stopped lurking, and then so next slide. So I stopped lurking and I genuinely engaged. So there's a lot of keywords that I will be echoing from Dr. Jameson's session, but I focused on engaging with content that resonated with me. I made sure to sound like a real person and not a Russian bot. And I just, expressed interest in people and their interests. So it's a two-way street. Not only did I engage, but I also made sure to have a content, also had my own, sorry, you can go to the next slide now. So also encourage you to have the courage to be seen. So it's a two-way street, online as it is offline. Not only should you be engaging, but you should also have things for people to kind of check you out as well. Post about things that are demonstrating things that are important to you. If you're a gardener, share your garden. Be sure to post your photo every now and then so that people can see the human behind the social media content. So the next step to go further is also to have the courage to be vulnerable. So a little bit about my personal story. My dad, he's my favorite person in the world. I've tried to not cry during this talk, but he suffered a stroke a couple of years ago, and I shared that with my audience. I know that not a lot of people share their deeper issues online, but because I've had an online presence and he was such a big part of my life, I let my audience in on not only his stroke, but his stroke recovery. And also when I lost him, I shared my grief. And it ended up being such a good gift, that I gave myself by sharing. So when I shared these parts of my life, people would come, people who used to lurk on my social media content will come out and share their personal stories with me. And they've told me that I made them feel less alone and able to process their grief a little bit more fully. And then in turn, when they're telling me their stories, I felt less alone too. So it ended up being such a great gift that we gave each other by sharing online the deeper stuff. So to share another story about strangers, actual strangers in my life, these lovely people, I have never met them. I don't know them. I don't know anyone that knows them. So what had happened during this stroke journey was I needed to help I needed to find help for my mom when I was in North Carolina. My family is in Texas. So I got on my Facebook and I was looking for a carpool for my mom. She doesn't drive and she needed to visit my dad in the hospital. So I got on Facebook and I asked for anyone who commuted from these two areas of Houston. And no one in my immediate circle fulfilled that qualification, but someone shared it on their Facebook group, their personal stories. I mean, their local group. And these lovely strangers who did not know that friend volunteered. So the woman's name's Erin. She volunteered her husband, Troy, to be my mom's driver. So he's a very quiet man. He drove my mom, who spoke barely any English, for 2 weeks to the hospital and back home on his daily commute to work. And now I've met them after my dad has passed, and they're now such dear friends to me. We stay in touch through Facebook, and they even checked in my mom during COVID-19 and dropped off some groceries. And so I share this story as an example that social media doesn't have to be the superficial place where people just self-promote all the time. It can be a place where you find true, meaningful friendships. And so my last tip for you is to take everything offline when you can. So when you're able to have that coffee in person, if there's one thing that COVID-19 has taught us, is that we are social people and we crave that in-person, one-on-one time with people. So take things offline. And that's it from me. And these are my social media links. I can't talk about social media without sharing my social media. So don't be a stranger, and reach out if you like food and travel and photography.
All right, big thanks to Linda Nguyen. Now it's time to get your questions in. Type them into chat. We've got a couple already waiting, so we'll go on and get to those. From Steph in Zoom chat. When you're being vulnerable, how do you balance that with the privacy of the people that you're talking about?
Yes, that's something I had to learn the hard way in college. I shared a very private breakup to the internet, and the people that didn't want to find it found it. So what I've learned is if I'm talking about someone, I make sure that they know that they're online before I share. So with my mom in the stroke, we needed financial help. So I asked her for her blessing on sharing the story for a GoFundMe, and she was okay. They both know about my, I talk about them like they're present tense sometimes, but they both knew about my online presence, and they've always been great about communicating with me and me asking for permission if I'm ever wondering if they're going to be comfortable with me sharing a story. Same with my fiance. He's a very private person, so typically I try not to share about him at all, and he's been such a good training wheel for me because I'm 100% public and he's 0% public. So he's also helped me reinforce the rule of like, hey, if I'm sharing something about somebody else, let's ask this person if they're comfortable with that part of the story. I also really recommend processing everything personally on your own first, and so that you're in a safe place and you're not putting yourself in harm's way by oversharing something that you shouldn't have overshared.
All good tips. Next question comes from Tom in Zoom chat. For a boomer who hasn't participated in social media up to this point, what platform would you recommend as a first step to use without seeming like a creeper?
I think Facebook is great to find friends that you already have, to kind of have like a online level of friendship for your friends that you already have. And then Twitter is a great place to kind of find new friends, and it feels like an open forum on Twitter. So that's another way that's a great way to start off with strangers. And since you're a boomer, I think Twitter is actually probably a little bit more user-friendly than Instagram. Instagram is more photography based, but Instagram is also a great place to meet strangers.
All right, you've got the gamut there. Related question from Brock on social media. The question is, are there social networks out there that people might not be aware of that have a good community that they should potentially check out?
So I stick mainly to Facebook, Twitter, and I think that's it, and Instagram. But I know that there are people who love Reddit. Reddit's a great place to find subcultures. I'm not sure how great it is to find regular people. Sorry, my dog is starting to whine. But I would check out Reddit to find very niche subcultures of people. And I'm sorry, I don't have any other suggestions for platforms. That's my dog whining.
That's fine. Yeah, maybe there's a social network for dogs. Yeah. All right, ladies and gentlemen, big hand, and thank you so much for your expertise to Linda Nguyen. It is now time to move into our fourth speaker of the evening. She is an evolutionary astrologer based in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, with clients all over the world. Please welcome our next speaker, Nancy Fantozzi.
Thanks, Wade. Hi, everybody. It's really lovely to be here. I know we don't get to be together in person, but it's felt very intimate, and I love the themes that are playing between all of the speakers. I'm talking about Mercury retrograde. That subject presented itself because of the date of our meeting tonight. Mercury just went retrograde on Tuesday, and you know, it's got a really strong presence in popular culture. I think just about everybody's heard about Mercury retrograde by now. It's usually presented as kind of like a malicious trickster, like something you have to be afraid of, you have to hide from, kind of like wait it out, try not to do anything. Definitely gives people a license to complain and blame. The way I work with Mercury retrograde is very, very different. I see Mercury retrograde as this amazing opportunity that happens in this like natural rhythmic pattern. It's roughly every 4 months that Mercury will go retrograde. And when it goes retrograde, it's a clear sign that it's time for us to turn our attention inwards to our function of communication. So the planet Mercury represents the human function of communication. And when it turns retrograde, we are asked to do like a tune-up, right? So we bring our awareness inward and we pay attention to our function of communication. So we're going to look at how are we receiving data? How are we think of having sensory antennas, right? And we're taking in information both internally, we're taking in a lot of data from what's going on internally, but we're also taking in data from outside. It's a time to do a tune-up with those. Are we taking in too much data, more than we can process? Are we kind of shutting down because we feel overwhelmed and we're not taking in some data that we need to? What are the biases of those sensory antenna? What are they looking for? What are they trying to reinforce? Then once we have that data input, we process it. This has a lot to do with mindset. How are we processing that information according to what we've experienced in the past, or according to what we think is right and true? And then from there, we message back out. And that messaging is not just through spoken and written communication, it's also nonverbal, touch, expression, artistic expression. And we message outwards, but we also message inwards. And the quality of our messaging is related to what our sensory antenna are taking in, how we're processing it, and then how we're putting it out. And how we message has a huge impact on our relationship to ourselves and our relationship to other people. And I love that I think pretty much everybody so far has brought up how fundamental our relationship with ourselves is in impacting our relationship with other people. So we are asked, you know, each Mercury retrograde is going to be slightly different because it's going to be in one of the 12 signs. It's going to be in a context of all kinds of other things going on. And then each individual is going to have a different relationship to that Mercury retrograde because they have their own relationship to Mercury that they're born with, and that's unique. So there's a lot of specificity, but there's also some very specific things for everybody during each Mercury retrograde. And one of them is curiosity. And one of the ways I like to think about curiosity is it's simply, what don't I know? Approaching anything with what don't I know. We so tend to approach things with wanting to reinforce what we do know. And so it's just a very simple tweak. And Mercury retrograde is a fabulous time to do that. One thing that's really helpful is to think in terms of, we want the most amount of awareness while we are turning inward and becoming aware of our whole process of communication. We want to bring as much awareness as possible with the least amount of judgment. So judgment limits our options. Discernment is very helpful because part of what we're doing is we're realigning in this tune-up that happens rhythmically. We are realigning our function of communication with our values. We're dealing with things from the past that are unresolved and they come back up. And instead of complaining and hiding and blaming, it's time to really redeem our past. And okay, there's my button. And so I just want to say a couple of things about this particular Mercury in retrograde. The first 2 weeks of it are very much about developing emotional power, the capacity to stay present with what's uncomfortable. We have this gift right now. The first part of Mercury retrograde is in Scorpio. That's emotional power. It's the phoenix. It's the shaman. And we all can gain this extra emotional strength, psychological insight, the capacity to stay present with what's uncomfortable. And then on the 28th until the 3rd of November, this Mercury retrograde will be in Libra. And a lot of what that has to do with is honoring the human dignity in everybody. And it also has to do with finding harmony, balance, creative problem solving. And one of the things I love about it is that it's also about how do we communicate in all kinds of ways, spoken, non-verbally, who we are as the beloved, what our sense of beauty is, what our sense of peace, even during difficult times that we're all in. And so that's one of the gifts of the Mercury in Libra, is an enhanced capacity to message through yourself as the beloved and as someone who knows peace and beauty. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nancy. We will now go to your questions here in Zoom chat and on social media. Question coming in from Agnes on social media. If people are interested in learning about astrology, where's a good place for them to start?
Yeah, that's a great question I get all the time. Astrology is a massive field, and it depends what your interest is in astrology. I do teach, so I can I'll put in my website later. Love teaching. In terms of books, well, so first of all, avoid negative, fatalistic, deterministic astrology. If it's negative and it's telling you this is the way you are and this is what's going to happen, turn around and go the other direction. And then what I would say is a really fabulous book for like evolutionary astrology, for using astrology for self-growth and self-awareness is Stephen Forrest, The Inner Sky. If you are more interested in historical patterns and have a strong intellect, the astrologer I admire the most is Richard Tarnas, and his book is called Cosmos and Psyche. Both of these thought leaders in astrology, you can find lectures and interviews on YouTube. You can get their books, yeah, it's a huge field. So it takes time to find sort of where you resonate.
All right. Excellent. Good starting points there. A question from Helena on social media. She's been told growing up that crazy things happen on a full moon. Is there any truth to that?
You know, I think that labor and delivery rooms are more active on full moons. Certainly, we see the tides are more extreme on full moon. So the moon, in terms of each planet representing a function, the way Mercury represents the function of communication, the moon represents the emotional function. And when the moon is full in the sky, it is a time, it's a current event, it's a climate where emotions are active. And so I would just be cautious about the negative implications of craziness. And what I would say is that during a full moon, it's a fabulous time to activate, to act on, and to put into motion what we are feeling passionate about.
Excellent. And a question on Zoom chat from Sheil. She says, or they, I don't want to presume, they say they're getting very comfortable with social distancing. Is that anything to do with Mercury?
Well, Mercury just went retrograde on Tuesday. And you know, this is a good place to make the point that this Mercury retrograde is in the context of a lot of other things going on. And then each individual has their own foundation, their own birth chart, their own relationship to each of these planets. So we're all being influenced differently by what's happening in the current events astrologically. So I would not attribute it to that. I'm sure it's a more complex and personal response.
All right, and if you want to learn more from Nancy Fantozzi, I'm sure she'll be dropping some information about her teachings in the Zoom chat. Ladies and gentlemen, big virtual hand for Nancy Fantozzi.
Thank you, Wade.
All right, and we are now to our final speaker of the evening. She has spent years studying, practicing, and teaching effective listening and understanding to organizations, businesses, and individuals. Please welcome Marilyn Shannon.
Hey everyone, this is really exciting, and I've loved listening to each of the speakers that came before me, and I love how listening keeps popping up, so it's exciting. So in just one afternoon, listening to the hearts of twins, the power of these relationships to heal the world. And one thing I want to say about this is when you listen into the heart of anyone, you really get a handle. You really understand them to their core and their humanness. And so that's where we're going to, that's how I've studied twins and how I study anything is through listening. So next slide, please. So my role models are my mother and my aunt. They are 95, but this is their picture at 90. And they are amazing women. Next slide. Growing up with two mothers that were twins was incredible. They are crazy, they were curious, and they are my inspiration. Next slide. Here they are at 94. So that you can tell that they're pretty cool women. Next. So I studied twins not only as a daughter or a niece, but also as a humanist. I'm not a scientist. I am a relationship person. I studied over 40 sets of twins, and they included fraternal, identical, same sex, different color. One was white, one was black. Some were unaware they were actually even a twin. There was one twin I studied that the mother had a miscarriage before birth, and there was only one of the twins left. So it was from birth to 93, and they all told a story. And twins are on a spectrum from one end of the line to another, and they involve all kinds of information, and it makes it very exciting to study them. So on one end, they're powerfully connected. They live in the same place since birth. They share a bed in some cases. They complete each other's sentences. Their teeth fell out on the same day. They fell off the bike the same day. And they knew when the other one was choking to death. And I had a set of one twin that I interviewed whose brother was passing away, and he could feel it in his throat. On the other end of the spectrum, however, they compete. They strive to be opposites. They argue, and they'll do whatever they can to be different. But at the end of the day, and the next slide, please, they're always twins. At the end of the day, in just one afternoon, twins are the quintessential role model for relationships, for sibling rivalry, for parenting and conflict resolution. At the end of the day, they're always twins. Why? Because they're twins. They're always twins first. They find their way back to that unconditional love, the connection, and the root, which is each other. They accept the fact they are connected, no matter what that connection looks like and how it's given, no matter how different they want to be, and they strive very, very hard to be different. In some cases, they're still twins. And they show us sibling rivalry because, again, at the end of the day, it's the twin factor that makes the difference. And the conflict may be there, but they're still twins. So no matter what, they will have that rivalry. They will compete for this, they'll compete for that, but at the end of the day, they're twins. And it stems from the fact of their origin, right? So they'll disagree, they'll argue, they'll challenge each other, but that connection stays intact. They don't give themselves a choice to disconnect. The connection is always there. It's through whatever they're going through. They just don't give themselves a choice. Next slide. So what does this mean? It means that if they are able to create their uniqueness, their freedom, their separateness from each other, even the difference, even though when the difference is forced and they're still twins, then the rest of us can do that too. They shared a womb. They were the first ones that they hugged. They were the first connection they had. But nonetheless, we share this whole big world. And I believe that the twins are our lesson in understanding how we each could get along with each other because we're all from the same earth. So we can help each other be free. We can help each other be unique. We can help each other get through conflict. And we can help each other understand our gifts. Next slide. So the constant question that always came up for me as I interviewed all of my twins that I interviewed was what we can learn from them in how they are activating their relationship with each other. And they just plain accepted who they are. And some of them, it was so interesting because some of them lived very far away. And when I interviewed them in my book, and some of them I interviewed at the same time, and others I interviewed completely separate. But when I listened into their story, it was fascinating how they each could, they would say the same things and they weren't in the same room. They would recite the same memories and they weren't in the same place, and it was fascinating. So twins have a lot to teach us about love and just getting along. Next slide. And so here's my mother and my aunt in June at 95. They fight. You always know when they're on the phone together because they're fighting and they're this and they're that, but you know what? They love each other and they never give it up. Next slide. So here is my book, In Just One Afternoon, which is full of all kinds of stories. You can find it on Amazon. Just look for In Just One Afternoon, Listening to the Hearts of Twins. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you, Marilyn. It's time for your questions about the subject of twins and their relationships and what it might mean to you. Question from Steph in Zoom chat. Do the things that you see in twins apply equally to identical and fraternal twins, or are there differences in what you see between the two?
Again, it's that spectrum. You would think sometimes that, maybe fraternal would act differently. No, they're protective. I think the main difference is when you are an identical twin and you're looking in the mirror, you're looking at one face. So very often, some of the identical twins would purposely cut their hair and the other one wear it long. Or one would have tattoos and one purposely wouldn't have tattoos. So I do think they do some different things, but ultimately at the end of the day, when you listen right into them, their actions, ultimately they do the same thing.
There I am. All right, question coming in from Laquan on social media. Laquan says that they have friends that they're very close to. They'd like to have a better relationship. What lessons can they learn from twins that might help them have better relationship with their non-twin friends?
That's a really, really good question. Just when you're going into a relationship of any kind, assume the connection. Assume that we have this line between us. It's an invisible line of connection that exists between all of us. And it takes listening to activate the line. And so being aware that that line, babies feel a connection as soon as they're born to whoever's holding them. I mean, when you shake somebody's hand or you hug somebody, you feel this connection. If we all realize this invisible line of connection that exists between all of us and the awareness of this line through our listening, which is an awareness, we can connect with anyone and we can feel the connection, and we will know when when something is kind of off on the line and how to bring it back. So I believe we can connect with anyone.
All right, another question from Shelley on social media. In your research on twins, did you notice anything interesting about the twins' relationship with their other non-twin siblings when those were around?
Yeah, sometimes it's kind of sad. And I don't think the twins do it necessarily on purpose, but it's the other sibling that just doesn't feel as connected. They don't have that, maybe the same language. You could have twins sitting together, babies, and they will have a gibberish and they understand each other. So, it takes unique twins to bring in the other sibling. And I've interviewed lots of those kinds of families and the dynamics. And sometimes that the third wheel is out and sometimes they're in. And when they're in, it's a really lovely experience, but it does happen a lot.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, big thanks for that research on twins from Marilyn, Shannon.
Thank you.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we have reached the end of RTP180 for October 2020 with Mercury in retrograde. This has been Relationships, but fear not, we're coming back at you in November, the third Thursday in November. We'll be talking about genetics, everything from babies to chestnut trees and all things in between. Our topic will be genetics on November 19th, showtime 6 p.m. right here on Zoom and Facebook Live. Don't forget, we will be reopening for co-working on a reservation basis starting November 2nd. You can go to the CoWorks app in your favorite app store to sign up for a spot at the Frontier. Maybe you'll see me. I'm not sure if when they reopen they're going to let me out, but bring food if you can. Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of our sponsor, RTI International, and our streaming sponsor, Dual Boot Partners, I've been your MC, Wade Minter, saying thanks for coming out. Wherever you are watching us, enjoy the rest of your day. Have a safe journey home if you're not already there, which you probably are. We will see you next month. Goodbye, everybody.